I'm going to draw pictures and make pictures appear on empty space. He doesn't have a canvas, doesn't have any paper, doesn't have a mural, a wall, but he just takes his palette of paints and sees a nice scene, nice landscape, and starts painting away on empty space. So what do you think, O monks? Could that man draw pictures and make pictures appear on empty space? And the monks say, no, Bhante. Why is that? Because empty space is formless and non-manifestive. That is, it doesn't manifest anything. It isn't easy to draw pictures or make pictures appear on empty space. Actually, it's impossible to make pictures appear on empty space. Unless one has maybe some kind of siddhis, supernormal powers. So eventually, the man would reap only weariness and disappointment. So the man trying to paint pictures in empty space, this would be like the man or person who comes along and tries to provoke you to anger with false accusations, with harsh speech, with angry words, with the intention of harming you. And so your mind should be like empty space. Even though the harsh words are directed at your mind, but your mind doesn't display any outbursts, inner outbursts of anger or hatred, and no outward outbursts of angry and harsh words. So you should abide, the Buddha says, with a mind similar to empty space, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility, without ill will. That is how you should train. Okay, now comes the third simile. And this is, a man comes along with a blazing grass torch and says, I shall heat up and burn away the river Ganges with this blazing grass torch. What do you think? Can that man heat up and burn away the river Ganges with the blazing grass torch? And the monks say, no, Bhante. Why is that? Because the river Ganges is deep and immense. It isn't easy, in fact it's impossible, to heat it up or burn it away with a blazing grass torch. Eventually the man would reap only weariness and disappointment. So it was with the river Ganges in the Buddha's day. Nowadays, with the river Ganges around Calcutta, the mouth of the river Ganges, I'm not so sure. If one comes along with a blazing torch and puts that torch to the river Ganges by Calcutta, certainly it won't make the river Ganges disappear, but it could well make the river Ganges blaze up into a massive ball of flame. And not only the river Ganges, I saw on a news report a couple of weeks ago, you know this practice called fracking? It's a practice by which natural gas companies try to extract natural gas from the earth by pumping the earth with certain types of organic gases at very, very high density. So it will cause the earth, places in the earth where the natural gas is stored, to break apart, and then the natural gas will become accessible, and then they could drain out the natural gas and direct it through pipes into, what do they call this? Tanks where they store it. And so what happens is, what they do is they go into even communities where they know that the natural gases can be found underground, and they practice this fracking. And as a result, this fracking, the high density organic gases that they pump into the ground can seep through the ground to the supply, to the water supply, to reservoirs, to lakes, to streams, and enter into the water supply so that it comes through the drinking water that supplies that community. And so in the news report that I saw, a man was illustrating to the reporter how their water supply had been infected by these high-density natural organic gases, organic substances. He turned on the tap, and the water came running out of the tap, and then after it came running for about 1 minute, he took a cigarette lighter, lit the cigarette lighter, and put it to the tap water, and then the tap water burst into flame. And this is going on in many places in this country now. Okay, but anyway, during the Buddha's day, water was still water. And so with the blazing brass torch, it wouldn't have been easy to burn it up and make it blaze and burn away. And so then the Buddha applies the simile and says, in the same way, when others speak to you with harsh, angry words, false accusations, intending to harm you, you should dwell, pervading that person with a mind of loving kindness, and spread the loving kindness throughout the world. And so you should abide, pervading the whole world with a mind similar to the river Ganges, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility, without ill will. Then comes the fourth simile. This one is a little peculiar. I don't quite really understand what's going on. Okay, suppose there were a catskin bag. It's hard to conceive of people killing cats to get the skin to use for a bag. Maybe this is just the name that they use for this type of bag. It's rubbed, well-rubbed, thoroughly well-rubbed, soft, silky, rid of rustling, rid of crackling. And then a man comes along with a stick or a potsherd thinking, I'm going to make this catskin bag rustle and crackle. Maybe that would be the sign of a badly matured catskin bag if it rustles and crackles. Maybe it was considered like prestige item, like having a Gucci or Gucci bag. What are some of the other companies? Coach.
A company that makes fine leather things.
Yeah, they're very expensive. Yeah.
Coach?
Yes.
Okay, Coach.
Pyramids.
Pyramid. The Gap, is that considered?
Yeah, it's cheap.
No, that's just, those are jeans.
Just like cheap bags.
Cheap stuff. President of Gap listens to my also with you.
Actually, Gap is known for child labor.
Oh,
It's
Yeah.
they're manufactured in my country, so I didn't know.
oh, that's a,
It's one of the notice.
yeah. Okay, so if this man comes along, tries to make the catskin bag crackle, he can't make it crackle because the catskin bag has been well rubbed, thoroughly rubbed, it's soft, silky, and so on. And so the man will only reap weariness and disappointment. And so then the Buddha brings out the point, in the same way, if others address you in timely or untimely ways, true or falsely, gently or harshly, connected with good or with harm, spoken with a mind of loving kindness or with inner hate, again you should train yourselves. Our minds will remain unaffected, and so on, without inner hate. And then you should develop this all-pervasive mind of loving kindness, similar to a catskin bag. abundant, exalted, unmeasurable, without hostility, without ill will. And then comes the example that gives the title to the discourse, and this is the sort of high point of patience, tolerance, imperturbability, and the development of loving kindness. Even if bandits were to sever you savagely, limb by limb, with a two-handled saw, that's the saw has a handle on either end, so they take you, tie you up from between two trees, and then they take the saw and they start sawing away your limbs one by one. One who gave rise to a mind of hate towards them would not be carrying out or fulfilling my teaching. But even in that situation, you should train yourselves thus. Our minds will remain unaffected, and we shall utter no evil words. We shall abide compassionate for their welfare, with a mind of loving kindness, without inner hate. We shall abide pervading them with a mind imbued with loving kindness, and starting with them, we shall dwell pervading the whole world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. That is how you should train, O monks. Does anybody think they could fulfill that? Somebody starts sawing you one limb after another, and you keep without any anger, without any ill will.
What I think is important is he's saying this is how you should train, not you should be able to do that right now.
Wonderful point. Wonderful point.
Train.
That's the way, that's the
Train
kind of
yourself.
ideal that one should aspire to. It doesn't mean that we're all at that state already. I know I'm not at that state. My one testing along this line, I've never been sawed apart, never beaten. But again, this goes back to the time when I was living in the forest hermitage in Sri Lanka. I was staying with the older German monk, Nika. This could have been 92, 93. And he, because he was at that time in his 90s, he was already 91, 92, and his hearing was weak. And so somebody from America had brought for him a device that looked something like this, with earphones that one plugs in, and earphones, and then one gives this device, this part, to the person who's speaking to him, and they will speak into this, and he could hear easily, rather than he found it inconvenient to use the hearing aid, because it always has to be subtly adjusted. But with this kind of device, the other person is responsible for the controls. The old monk, Nika, he just has to put the headphones on. And so we used to leave it on the table in the front room when he wasn't using it. And so one day, when he was resting in his room, some young boys came into the forest, and they knocked on the door, and they said, I opened the door, and they said, we've been walking through the forest, we're thirsty, can we have some water to drink? So I said, okay, wait a moment, I'll get some water for you. So I went back into the kitchen to get a cup of water for the boys. I came walking back into the front room. The boys were gone. Then immediately my eyes went to the table, and the hearing aid was gone, that hearing device. And I realized that once they thought it was a radio, a kind of transistor radio, and they took it to keep it or to sell it. And immediately I became very angry. But not because it was my device. Maybe if it was my device, I would have taken it with equanimity. But because it was my teacher's device, did I say advice? Not because it was my device, but it was my teacher's device. Then I became really angry, and 1992, I was 48 years old, and here was a 48-year-old man chasing after a bunch of 14-year-old boys through the forest. They eluded me. But eventually we got them. I think I went to the police station, reported it to the police, and somehow the police tracked them down. I don't remember how. But we got it back. I went to the police station, I saw those boys. When I saw them, I wasn't angry with them, but I gave them some advice that they shouldn't do this and to steal things from monks. Especially, I asked them, what is your religion? They said, we're Buddhists. To steal things from monks from a monastery, very dangerous. Do you realize what kind of karma you're creating? Okay, so, but this is a very good point you made, that this is advice for training. It doesn't mean that we're already at that level, but we have to train ourselves step by step to reach that. Then the Buddha says, if you keep this advice on the simile of the sword constantly in mind, you see, that's the simile that the Buddha is giving for us to remind ourselves. Do you see any kind of speech, trivial or gross, that you could not endure? And so the monks say, no, Venerable Sir. And so then the Buddha says, therefore you should keep this advice on the simile of the sword constantly in mind. That will lead to your welfare and happiness for a long time. There's another interesting point coming out of the simile. Can anybody get what it might be? Just look at paragraph 21, the sentence, if you keep this advice on the simile of the sword constantly in mind, do you see any course of speech, trivial or gross, that you could not endure?
It's very like the mastery of the mind in the last sutta that we studied last week.
Yeah.
It's a different practice that seems to aim at the same result.
Yeah. But there's something else that I had specifically in mind that just occurred to me when I read that sentence.
It would make anything you're enduring trivial compared to the being sought.
In fact, yeah, that just expresses in a different way the point that I had in mind. The simile deals with a case where somebody is actually sawing your body apart, limb by limb. But it's applied, the Buddha isn't saying, therefore, monks, you should be able to keep your mind in the state of loving kindness even when others saw you apart, limb by limb. But he's taking it to a more tolerable situation, at least as a starting point for training. Therefore, you should be able to endure any course of speech. So, when you apply the simile of the mind, when you apply the simile of the soul in one's mind, then one thinks, when others are speaking to you in angry, harsh ways, you think, the Buddha said that if bandits were to saw us apart, or to saw me apart limb by limb, I should be able to endure it. So what to me are these harsh words? It's a little bit like when we were children, we used to have this verse, sticks and stones might break my bones, but words can never harm me. Actually, words can do a lot of harm. But one uses this as a kind of guideline for training or practice. Okay, so this takes us through the simile of the soul. Any questions that come out from this? These are from the internet. Okay, one question. Jesus also taught turn the other cheek in the Sermon of the Plains, the Sermon of the Mount. Instead of turning the other cheek, isn't it better to just run away? Also, isn't it better to run away from, from the bandits with the two-handled sword? First of all, I think Jesus' advice about turning the other cheek, I don't think that should be taken literally. It doesn't mean literally that if somebody hits you, you just function like a masochist and say, yeah, that felt good, but don't do it on that cheek, do it on the other cheek. So you have to interpret that piece of advice according to the intention, not take it literally. The point, I think, is not to take revenge on the person who hits you on one cheek, but instead regard them with compassion and maybe even do a good turn to them as a way of sort of breaking down their hatred or hostility. And then the question, isn't it better to run away from the bandits? Of course, it's better to run away from them, but I think the simile is presupposing that as you were running away, you slipped on a little track of muddy ground, and the bandits have caught you and tied you up, and they're cutting you to pieces, and so you can't get away from them. Okay, the other question is just a matter of translation. I won't say the whole question, I'll just give the answer. Yes, the two phrases in the Majjhima Nikaya and in the Sanguttara Sutta are the same in Pali, it's just being translated in different ways. Any other question?
Two questions, and appreciate your comments on either or both.
Okay.
Several times, the phrase based on the household life, and here we are, a bunch of householders, and I wonder if that is, I wonder about it, because it seems to imply that we as householders need not or do not attempt to follow the same training in our own way. The other question is the one about Kali, the maid whose intentions are may be seen as strange. I mean, she's taunting.
Yeah, I have to say I agree with you about that. I don't like to criticize a simile or a story given by the Buddha, but it seems it's a little extreme that the maid is deliberately violating her duties just to test her mistress, and probably she shouldn't behave in that way. I'll come back to the other question. Did you have some comment on that point?
No, I was just going to say that was well brought up, because every time I read the sutta, I get very angry, especially at that little parable, because she's probably a pervert. She's a pervert. I mean, to do that, to deliberately tweak somebody, that's some bad.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, yeah.
She deserved a cloud on her head. Just my opinion.
I have to say the cloud on the head is a little strong, but if it injures her physically, that goes to an extreme. But if she just answers, what is it to you, madam? I've just decided to get up late today. I mean, she's not fulfilling her responsibility as an employee in the household.
Yeah, but the simile is that we should not assault someone, even though she's violating.
Take the...
See, even though she's violating her duties, we have no right to hit her. So therefore, it makes it worse or better. In other words, she could have just said, look, I'm sorry, you may be sick, I understand, I need more time. Maybe you need a week of rest. Maybe you need to take off a little bit so that you could rest. So therefore, you could work with compassion And therefore, I mean, I've done this in many cases with employees I used to do it where they come in and they couldn't make one day. I'll say, listen, take the day off next day. And say, no, I'm coming tomorrow. No, just take off. And I make them take off. That person will take off and it will work. Because I will give them a few days. And therefore, they will come back and say, but I'm going to lose money. Well, that's okay, because then you rest. And they come back, and next time they come in town. So therefore, I worked with this person so that instead of hurting them, I hurt them in the pocket where it hurts. So she could have done the same thing with her. I said, listen, you could take off, and you don't get paid, but you'll rest. And she will come back eventually and say, oh, she has good temper. She worked perfectly the way you should work around people. That's what he's trying to say.
Yeah.
But of course, either way you put it, of course she did something that was intentional because she was testing him.
Yeah. Anyway, I think we don't have to insist on taking the simile to imply that the Buddha is approving of that way of testing.
Right.
Testing one's employer. It's just a simile to bring out the point that sometimes somebody can have an apparently meek, gentle, humble exterior, but inside they're still harboring anger. Okay, coming back to the first question. I have to say, within, say, the context of household life, again, like if one is training according to the Buddha's teaching, one should be training, not to get angry, say, if somebody speaks badly about one's wife, one's husband, one's children. Ideally, one shouldn't get angry, but naturally one feels a certain degree of worldly affection for them. So, certainly one should come to their defense, unless one agrees with the criticism. But it seems to be just an expression that was used. The more we might translate it, Gehen Nisitam. It's literally depending upon the house, or depending upon the home. Connected with the house, connected with the home. So it's referring more to the kind of ways of reacting that will go on in ordinary household life. It doesn't mean that somebody who's a householder but a follower of the Buddha's teaching shouldn't also be trying to train in this way. But at the same time, I would say one should recognize that because of the affection that arises from family relationships, sometimes the responses will be more difficult to modify and control than it would be to other people. Well, I have to say, it doesn't happen only in amongst householders, but in the monastery, sometimes if one has, you have a teacher, a preceptor or a teacher, and then you're with some other monks, and they speak critically about your teacher, then naturally you get upset and angry with them. Like I used to hear about the well-known American monk Ajahn Sumedho. People would say that he never gets angry under any circumstances except if others criticize Ajahn Chah, his teacher.
You just were reading my mind because I was thinking of Ajahn Sumedho when he was speaking when he was younger. He was a relatively young monk, and he's like, well, he's just about the best teacher there is. You can do it. And he would get really angry. He wouldn't say, but he just wanted to kill them. He said, say anything against him.
I do have, I think it's interesting, the other similes. The Buddha says that the other person will reap just weariness and disappointment.
Yeah.
In a certain way, this is a very effective defense.
Yeah.
That I find as a householder and in watching international affairs, like as a wife and mother, if I don't get angry when I'm provoked, if my child is very anxious, my husband gets very anxious,
Yeah.
they will try to goad me into an argument. But if I do not get angry, I'm like sort of like a martial arts master, and either the argument will dissipate, or something will change. But I have to keep grounded, keep stable, and not let them make me lose my balance. And I noticed, like when I watched the news, like when Vice President Biden was in Israel and was surprised with this terrible news, I could see how angry he was and what a struggle it was for him to maintain his dignity. But when I read this, we're letting the other person, the opponent, read weariness and disappointment. It's also a very effective way of defending yourself, don't you think?
In fact, last week I told you about the method that I used when I was taking walks in West Hempstead, Long Island. When the cars go by, like, and somebody shouts something insulting out the window of the cars that goes by, why don't you dress like a human being? Why don't you put on some slacks and a shirt? What are you, a freak or something? If I look up, then they win. But if I just keep on focusing on my feet, continue to look down, then they reap weariness and frustration, in a sense. Okay, I think we'll have to end now the discussion now, but we'll continue after lunch. We'll come back for a little while. So if you have other points you want to discuss, then please return after lunch. Next week is the 20th. I won't have the class next week. The 27th, what I've decided to do, there'll be a retreat going on, and I want to enter that retreat, but the morning of the 27th, I'll hold a class. Otherwise, because 2 weeks after that, I won't be able to have the class. Then it'll be too long a gap. So the 27th, I'll hold the class, but because the Kuan Yin Hall will be used for the retreat, we'll have the class in the Wu Wu Library. The library, just as you're coming into the monastery. So please remember to go to the library next week. I'm sorry, March 27th. The 27th. And when the reminder goes out, it will also, I'll have Kaiji mention that in the reminder. Okay, we end with the verses to share the merits. Yeah, I found one thing that makes me angry. It's not even another person speaking. Not even sawing my lips. Shirang Rakantu Sasanam Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyanta Nanvoditva Shirang Rakantu Desanam Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyanta Nanvoditva Shirang Rakantu Mantaram Eta Vatacham Hei Sampadam Sampadam Sabbe Devanamo Sabba Sampati Siddhya Sabbe Bhutanamo Dantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Sabbe Satanamo Dantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Bhavagupadhaya Vichihitato Etantare Satakayupapanna Rupya Rupicha Sanya Sanyino Dukkha Pamochantu Pusantu Nibuktin.
Satu, satu, satu.
Okay, we stand.